The look on Brenda's face when Bill slid that manila folder across the mahogany table is something I'll take to my grave with a smile. For 6 months, she'd been walking around like she'd already won the lottery, tossing out insults like they were loose change and looking at me as if I were nothing more than a stubborn obstacle in the way of her early retirement. She thought she was taking half of my life's work, a cool $1 million from the engineering firm I'd bled for over 30 years. But as Bill cleared his throat and pointed to the underlined text on page 14, I watched the color drain from her cheeks until she looked as gray as the blueprints I used to draw by hand. Brenda had spent 20 years refusing to understand the fine print of my life, and that morning, the fine print finally bit back. But to understand why she had no one to blame but herself, I need to take you back to the beginning. I started Vanguard Structural Engineering in 1994 with nothing but a used drafting table, a level, and a set of keys to a garage that leaked every time it drizzled. I wasn't a man of leisure, I was a man of calculations. I spent my 30s and 40s working 80-hour weeks, my boots caked in North Carolina red clay and my lungs full of drywall dust. I built this company project by project, bridge by bridge, and warehouse by warehouse. I provided a life for Brenda and our 2 children, Jason and Sarah, that I never could have dreamed of. We had the 5-bedroom house in the Highlands, the summer trips to the coast, and the best education money could buy. I thought I was building a legacy. I thought I was earning respect. The first crack in that foundation appeared about 5 years ago, though I suppose I was too busy working to see it for what it was. It started with small things, disdain disguised as humor. I'd come home from a site visit, exhausted and covered in grit, and Brenda would pull her silk robe tighter and ask me to use the mudroom entrance because I smelled like a construction site. At dinner, Jason, who I'd handed a comfortable project management role at the firm, would talk over me about modernizing the business, implying that my methods were relics of a bygone era. I remember one night specifically. It was my 60th birthday. I'd just landed the contract for the Oak Haven Municipal Bridge, the biggest win in Vanguard's history. I came home expecting a celebration. Instead, I found Brenda on the phone, complaining to her sister about how Arthur's work was once again ruining her plans for a weekend in Charleston. When I walked in, she didn't even look up. She just gestured toward a cold plate of pasta on the counter. No happy birthday, no congratulations, just a reminder that I'd missed the 6 p.m. window for the good dinner. That should have been my wake-up call. I should have realized then that to my family, I wasn't a father or a husband. I was an ATM with a pulse. But I kept telling myself it was just a phase. I told myself that once the Oak Haven project was done, I'd retire and we'd find our way back to each other. But things didn't get better, they got worse. Last year, the disrespect turned into a full-scale mutiny. It started when I refused to sign off on a $200,000 investment Jason wanted to make in some tech startup his friends were running. It was a blatant cash grab, a vanity project with no viable business model. When I said no, Jason didn't just argue, he insulted me in front of the entire office staff. He called me a dinosaur who was holding the company hostage with his cowardice. That evening, I went home to find Brenda and Sarah sitting in the living room, waiting for me like a tribunal. They didn't ask why I'd made the decision. They didn't care about the fiscal health of the company. They told me I was being cruel to my own son. Brenda looked me dead in the eye and said, "You've always loved those blueprints more than your own blood, Arthur. If you won't help your son, what good are you to this family?" If that was all, I probably would have let it go. I've always been a patient man. But then came Thanksgiving. We were at Brenda's sister's house. I was sitting in the corner, nursing a drink, when I overheard Brenda talking to her sister and Sarah in the kitchen. They didn't know I was right outside the door. Brenda was laughing, a cold, sharp sound I hadn't heard in years. "Oh, I've already talked to a lawyer," she was saying. "Vanguard is worth at least $2 million on paper. I'll take my half, sell the house, and Jason can run the rest of it into the ground for all I care. I've spent 30 years playing the supportive wife to a man who smells like wet concrete. I've earned my payout." Sarah didn't defend me. She just chimed in, "Just make sure you get the beach house in the settlement, Mom. I want to spend my summers there." And that's when I realized they didn't see me as their father or their husband. They saw me as a bank account they were waiting to liquidate. Something in me shifted that day. The hurt didn't disappear, but it crystallized into a very cold, very sharp clarity. I didn't say a word during dinner. I even complimented the turkey. But the next morning, I didn't go to the office. I went to see Bill. Bill and I have been partners for 28 years. He's the inside man, the numbers guy who handles the contracts while I handle the engineering. He'd seen how Brenda and the kids treated me, and he'd been warning me for years. When I told him what I'd heard, he didn't look surprised. He just sighed and asked, "So what do you want to do, Art?" "I want to give her exactly what she asked for," I said. "I want to give her 50% of my stake in Vanguard, exactly 50%. Bill smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of a man who knew where all the bodies were buried in the ledger. "You're sure? Because if we trigger the restructuring now, while the Oak Haven project is in the red during the expansion phase." "I'm sure," I said. "Get the paperwork ready." I spent the next 2 months getting everything in order. I played the part of the tired, defeated husband to perfection. When Brenda finally served me the divorce papers 3 months later, I didn't fight her. I didn't even argue about the irreconcilable differences. I told her, "Brenda, if you want half, you can have half. I'm too tired to fight you anymore." She was smug. She thought she'd broken me. She and Jason even started picking out new furniture for the executive office, assuming I'd just roll over and disappear. They had no idea what was coming. None of them did. The day of the final settlement meeting was a rainy Tuesday in March. We were gathered in a high-rise office downtown. Brenda was there with her shark of a lawyer, a man named Henderson who looked like he'd traded his soul for a set of veneers. Jason was sitting behind her, looking at his watch like he had somewhere more important to be. I sat alone on my side of the table. Bill sat at the head, acting as the neutral managing partner of the firm. Henderson started the meeting with a flourish. "We've reviewed the valuation of Vanguard Structural Engineering. Based on current contracts and assets, we've placed the value at $2.1 million. My client is seeking 50% of Arthur's 70% ownership stake, which comes out to roughly $735,000 in cash or equivalent equity, plus half of the marital home and the retirement accounts." Brenda leaned back, a small, victorious smirk playing on her lips. She didn't even look at me. She was looking at the city skyline, probably imagining which penthouse she was going to buy. "That's a fair valuation of the assets," Bill said calmly. He opened the manila folder. "However, we need to discuss the structure of the partnership agreement that Arthur and I signed back in 2018 during the Oak Haven expansion." Henderson frowned. "What are you talking about?" "Well," Bill said, sliding a document across the table, "when we took out the $1.2 million line of credit for the new heavy machinery and the bridge stay cables, Arthur and I signed a personal liability absorption clause. It's a standard move for high-risk engineering firms. It means that any owner of the company's equity is personally responsible for a pro rata share of the corporate debt should a transfer of ownership event occur." The room went very quiet. I watched Jason's brow furrow. He was a project manager, but he'd never bothered to learn the corporate structure. He didn't see the trap until he was already in it. "A divorce settlement," Bill continued, his voice as steady as a metronome, "is classified under our bylaws as a voluntary transfer of equity. By demanding 50% of Arthur's stake, Brenda isn't just inheriting the assets. She is legally assuming 50% of his personal liability for the outstanding business loans." Bill pointed to the bottom line. "Currently, Vanguard owes $1.2 million on that expansion loan. Arthur's share of that debt is $840,000. By taking half of his stake, Brenda, you are officially inheriting a $420,000 debt obligation, due to be serviced immediately upon the transfer of shares, as per the bank's change of control covenant." Brenda's smirk didn't just fade, it evaporated. She looked at Henderson. "What is he talking about? I'm getting the money. He's supposed to pay me." Henderson was frantically flipping through the partnership agreement Bill had provided. His face was turning a shade of red that matched the Oak Haven clay. "Wait, this clause, it says here that the liability is inseparable from the equity." "That's right," Bill said. "And since the firm's liquid cash is currently tied up in the Oak Haven performance bond, there is no cash payout available. Arthur's equity is land rich but cash poor, as they say. So Brenda, you now own 25% of a very successful engineering firm, and you also owe the First National Bank $420,000. They'll be expecting the first interest payment of $3,200 on the first of the month. Oh, and since you're now a partner, you're also responsible for your share of the quarterly insurance premiums and the payroll tax shortfall from Q3. That's another $180,000. You can't do this," Jason shouted, jumping to his feet. "You're rigging the books." "The books are audited, Jason," I said, speaking for the first time. My voice was calm, almost gentle. "You'd know that if you spent more time looking at the ledgers and less time looking at Porsches. I told you kids for years that this business was a responsibility, not just a piggy bank. You didn't want to hear it." Brenda was shaking. "Arthur, tell him to stop. You can't let them take my money." "It's not your money, Brenda," I said. "It was our life, but you decided you wanted half. Well, this is what half looks like. It's not just the fancy dinners and the beach house. It's the $600,000 in debt that kept this company afloat while you were complaining about the smell of my boots. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She had fought for months to prove she was entitled to half of my business. She had used the law to trap me, only to find that the law is a two-edged sword. To pay the debt she now legally owned, she wouldn't be buying a penthouse. She'd have to sell the very house she just won in the divorce. She'd have to liquidate her own savings just to keep the bank from foreclosing on her new investment. Henderson tried to argue, tried to find a loophole, but Bill was 10 steps ahead of him. Every document was airtight. Every signature was hers or her lawyer's, acknowledging the transfer of all rights and obligations. The meeting ended in a chaotic blur of Henderson stuttering and Brenda sobbing. Jason tried to glare at me, but he couldn't hold my gaze. He knew that as a minority partner now, he was also on the hook if the company faltered. He'd finally gotten the modernization he wanted. He was now personally responsible for the mess he'd helped create. I walked out of that office into the rain, and for the first time in a decade, my chest didn't feel tight. In the aftermath, Brenda had to sell the Highlands house. She moved into a small condo 2 towns over. She tried to sue me again, claiming I'd misled her, but the judge took one look at the documents she'd signed, demanding the equity over a cash settlement, and threw the case out. She'd been so greedy for the big number that she hadn't checked the math. Jason didn't last long at the firm. Without me to shield him from his own mistakes, he was overwhelmed by the reality of the debt he'd helped bring on to his mother. He resigned 3 months later. Sarah doesn't call me much anymore, which is a shame, but I've learned that you can't buy a daughter's respect with a beach house you don't own. As for me, I'm still at Vanguard. Bill and I restructured again 6 months later. We finished the Oak Haven Bridge ahead of schedule, and the bonus from the city cleared the debt entirely. But since Brenda had already sold her shares back to the company for pennies on the dollar just to get out from under the bank's thumb, she didn't see a cent of that profit. I live in a modest house now, closer to the water. It's quiet. There's no silk robes, no complaining about the smell of work, and no one looking at me like I'm a ledger to be balanced. I still wear my boots. I still get a little red clay on the floor. But now when I sit down to dinner, the only person I have to answer to is myself. My son calls every now and then, usually when a bill is due. I don't answer. Funny how that works. When you spend your life building something, you learn that the most important part of any structure isn't the steel or the concrete. It's the foundation. And if the foundation is rotten, the whole thing has to come down before you can finally have some peace. I finally got mine.